Hey pals, welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be giving some feedback on some art that was sent to me by a viewer here in chat who followed my recent tutorial on architecture. So I'm going to go through and give some notes about what I like and what I think could be improved, and I'm going to give some examples on how I would improve it. So this was sent to us by Zuries, and Zuries was following my most recent tutorial. 2 weeks ago, they said they started pixel art. So this, I think, is really impressive for, being that early on in the process. We were talking here on stream about different perspectives in pixel art, and that's a video I'd love to make really soon. So here we've got a closer to top-down or three-quarter view. Let's talk about the things that work, the things that don't, and we'll try to factor in that perspective conversation in that process. So what do I think about this? I really like the approach. I think the colors are mostly really nice. I like the blue for the roof, although I would say maybe a little saturated or a little dark. As we've got a really nice bright color here for the wall that sort of provides a little bit of contrast. Maybe there's some shadow work that could be done to give a bit more shape to that. I like the slopes on the sides of the buildings. That adds some perspective there, which is similar to sort of what I was doing in the shoe-in, but actually works better here because of the top-down sort of nature of it. I like the foliage. I like the brick texture. Zuries has mentioned that they struggled trying to do the minimalist sort of gestalt brick style where we only draw a few elements of the bricks. Personally, I actually think this works quite well as is, but I do want to cover how that process is translated over to this style, and to point out another detail. The tiles here are the things that stand out the most as being something that could really use that principle. We've got lots of noise here and two tones, which is a little bit odd to me because we've got a lot more tones across other elements of the building. So the bricks have, let's count them, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different tones associated with them. Whereas the tiles only have 2 or maybe 3 if this is a bit darker than this, which it is. So it's really 2 or 3. I would say for consistency's sake, you would want to even those out, and they should probably meet somewhere in the middle. So it probably should be like 3 or 4 for both. That said, I think having 6 colors for these tiles makes them look really earthy and imperfect, and it makes the offsets really sell, having those subtle shades. That's something that if you work with a strict palette, you probably won't have enough shades of brick style tones to actually sell that effect as well as it's been done here. The only trouble is, now having done that, it makes the rest of it struggle a little bit because you have to keep up with your own standard. I would say my favorite part of this is the brick, but if this is going into a game, it might not be practical to keep up this level of detail. So I want to focus on these tiles for now because I think that's the easiest place to make improvements. There's a brighter tone here than here for the face of the tile, which implies that there's some sort of sunlight coming from this direction. I don't dislike that as an idea, but it's something that I would like to have seen sold a little bit more throughout. If it's going to be done at all, right, you have to kind of commit to it. Having directional lighting in a game it's a big decision to make because everything has to reflect that. So in this case, I would probably say it's not worth doing, but if we were going to do it, it would be something that I would reflect in the shadows here underneath the awnings and just in general around the work. So let's stick with the colors that were given to us. But let's see if we can get some more shades in here. So what I'm going to do is just plot. I'm selecting the ink from these two and I'm just watching. We've got a color down here and the next color's here. So the next one probably should be somewhere around here. That's a little too green, so we can bring it back over and try that again. Yeah, that's not too bad. Maybe a little brighter though, make some more distinction. What I would do with this is I would use, because we have our light source is going to be above, right? the light is going to catch the surface of the things that are facing it the most. So in like 3D modeling, we would say like the surfaces of these bricks, the normal of the brick is facing the light source. That means that it's going to catch the most light. That is going to mean that it's the brightest here on these flat surfaces and darker in the areas where it faces sideways. So I'd probably take this and flatten it out, and then have it here like this, and then just up here we flatten it down. And I try not to distribute my colors evenly, right? I try not to have the exact same amount of each of the colors, because it doesn't really work like that in practice. It's more quadratic, not linear. So the distribution of colors tends to be something where, yeah, it's kind of more like closer to a bell curve. And keep in mind, a lot of the changes that I'm going to make are personal taste here. So they might not be, it's not necessarily that this is objectively, better in every sense, but overall, hopefully I can give some authority on this. It would be nice to see this light source reflected in the timber as well. So, if the brightest colors are here, then this should also be bright. As a side note, there's a lot of different colors being used here for the outlines. We've got a black for an outline. We've got this internal shading with this color, another different color here, another different color here. Lots of different colors being used for the sort of equivalent of an outline. Generally speaking, what you want to do is, there are options, right, with outlines. Outlines, you either go all black. So this is something that I would say is more of a UI thing, to have like a solid black outline. You would use it on text, or as like a very shortcutty or simplistic way of applying outlines for contrast for your game objects. Then there is selective outlining. So that's something that's similar to what we're seeing here. So we've got, black outlines in some areas and then a lighter blue outline. What I would do is something like this if I was going to do more of a selective outline. So you would see like, you can actually see the outline getting darker as the surface is getting darker. And we would see the same thing here. So it's almost like the outline is just another element that's added into the shading. And wherever you want the outline to be stronger, you use a darker tone. This is something that I don't do a lot of in my work. I try to keep things flat, but that's just a personal thing. So in our previous frame, we had a lot of lines. Back in the first work that I ever sort of did for Insignia, I had a similar difficulty with my tiles where adding this level of detail with these kinds of rules creates a kind of a contract with yourself where you have to be consistent. And in areas where it's challenging, you actually will find difficulty trying to manage that consistency. So here's a perfect example where that same rule is coming back, or that same dynamic, where it's hard to show that these tiles have any kind of perspective with rules like, every other line is a darker line, and whenever those rules get broken, it sticks out. So here, this row is wider than these two rows, but then the next row is narrow again. So much work, right, was put into this, but little things, little imperfections break it down, which feels like, you've put more work in, so it should be overall more impressive. But the closer you get to that sort of mathematical, logical perfection, the more you risk running into like a uncanny valley. Instead, my recommendation is, especially if you're starting out, to just avoid those kinds of rules. Just keep it nice and simple. And the technique that I use instead is to just be very sparse with the details. Like if I was to project this line across all the way, you notice that this doesn't line up with this brick, but you wouldn't notice that if I take the line away. And if we're just looking at this overall, it looks fine. So same principle. Don't create the contract for yourself, and then you won't have to stick to it. There's a technique that I was pointing at in the previous video, which related to using the contrast between areas that are shaded and not shaded as a kind of opportunity to show texture. So looking at this sprite, you can see that here where the shadow breaks, that's where I draw the texture. There's an extension of this little technique where you can actually show separate objects through a gradient as a way of dithering that gradient. So here the tone is trying to go from this bright color to this middle tone to this darker tone. And if we just let that line be a straight line, it's very obvious. This is called banding. You can really see the line go across. And if we were to dither that, then we get something that looks like this, right? We get something that looks sort of like a checkerboard effect. And that creates a texture, but it might not be the texture that we want. Instead, this is kind of like a little thing that I do that's kind of like smart dithering, where you actually take the shape of the thing, of the actual texture of the material into account as you dither. So I would use the tiles to actually give the effect of the dither. So you can actually see that I'm doing two things at once. I'm dithering the colors and I'm hinting at the texture all at once. And you can do this in a way that's, super duper subtle. You can even dot around little elements where you want to sort of create specular, little opportunities to show that light's being scattered. And this is also an opportunity to introduce maybe just one more color. So we can go here, and this is where we can add the top edge of some of these tiles. The rule here is like, let's just say we have a tile where we've got like the main color, the highlight color, and that's the tile. And then around it, let's just say it's like dark or whatever. Then you can apply this exact same rule, but shade it one higher or darker in this case. It's the same like algorithm, but we're just a shade down. That's what I'm taking advantage of here. The same algorithm of like main body, highlight, and surrounded by darker, but we're doing it here as well. So here's the main body, highlight, surrounded by darker, but all of these colors are one shade down from these colors. So that's the basic approach I would take to this roof. It still implies detail. We still have a lot of opportunity to really give it an expressive, textured look without going too far into it. And we could do like a quick copy and paste to show that on both sides. One thing I think that would be a real advantage here is if we were able to give a little bit more dynamism to this area as far as the shape is concerned. It's a really nice opportunity to create character in the game. And since we've got a little bit of an exaggeration here, I think it would be worth experimenting with expanding on that exaggeration. That's something that I would try with both color, shading, and shape. So for example, it might be a good idea to take the entire top half here and broaden it out. So I would then take that and I would exaggerate it by casting the shadow more expressively. The next thing I would do is I would try to take some of the detail out of the flowers. I love that the flowers are there. I love the flower boxes. There's probably a little too much contrast or just detail in general. So the fact that you've got like this color and this color and this color and this color so close together, it's really difficult to draw individual blades of grass the smaller we get. We start getting into the scenario where either shading the grass is too difficult or describing the effect of individual blades of grass in terms of the shadow they cast on other blades is too much of an issue. So here we've got like a scenario where we've got a blade here coming down, this one, and then we've got like a secondary color coming off it, and then we've got the colors behind that based on the shadow that it cast. Rather than drawing individual ferns or blades, I would experiment with just having it be more based on entire volumes. So, you know, we've got our entire box and I'm creating little breaks and then applying like a blanket shade and then creating just individual examples of little blades here and there that give the impression that the whole thing is made of those little pieces, rather than trying to draw 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, etc. Just make it one mass that is grass textured with the same approach as we did with the tiles. So you just draw little leaf elements that indicate what it is that we're looking at. This is a challenge no matter what. So how you solve it is going to be a personal thing, and it's going to be a part of how you define your style. But definitely one thing that I notice more and more talented pixel artists doing is taking the detail out rather than putting it in. It's just one of those things. Knowing exactly where to put the detail and how much of it to put is probably one of the biggest challenges you're going to come up against. It's totally like to be expected, and it's very, very common to be very literal about the decisions you make, right? Like I've got a box of leaves, so I'm going to do leaves, right? I'm going to draw them one at a time until I've filled the box. Another thing I would do is just consider maybe darkening these windows, but I think the blue stands out a bit more of the roof now that the interior is darker. Cool. So those are the obvious changes that I would make. I think that for a first effort, this is really, really good. And I honestly didn't have to change much. I think this is an improvement, or I would hope so. Otherwise, I'm not qualified to give you any advice. But the changes are not huge changes. So I think you did an awesome job. From here, maybe making some of these shadows a little more exaggerated. Just because I think even if a single pixel is clean, having a volume gives you a little more opportunity to sort of like describe parts of the building. So, you know, if you were to make this, you know, dotted, this edge, but it was 1 pixel, you wouldn't really understand what that looks like. But if I, you know, fill this all the way down, then I can do a bit more dithering around here or express more of a texture in the building. I can't do that if I've only got 1 pixel of shadow. So it's not a general rule to just make the shadows bigger, but in this instance, it's something that I would explore. As for your bricks, like I said, I think the size of these bricks and the contrast makes them just fine. You know, they're more than acceptable. So I honestly don't feel compelled to touch them. I think you did a really good job. I think you're a savage. Can we get a before and after? Yes. Yeah, I think the shape adds a lot. I think the shadows add a lot. I agree. If I was able to communicate these lessons effectively and you can apply them, your work's going to be really, really improving a lot faster, just with those little changes. So that's my feedback. Maybe that's all we need for today's video. Hey pal, thanks for watching, and thanks most especially to the patrons and Twitch subs who support this channel and my game dev project Insignia. To find out more, click the links in the description below. And if you like this video, tell YouTube by clicking the like button, and then YouTube will tell me, and then I'll make more videos. That's nice.